IVM.
Hi everybody, just wanted to ask everyone for a quick favor. We're running a brand survey right now and would really appreciate it if you could let us know what you think about the advertising on IVM. Go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and do let us know. As part of this, we'll be selecting 10 random participants and sending them some IVM swag, so do fill out those surveys.
This is Storytellers and Storysellers live on tape. You're listening to me, Vineet Kanabar, on the IVM Podcast Network. Last week, we kicked off what is going to be Podcast Month on this podcast. Hey, the idea is to talk to podcasters who are putting together very interesting, innovative, different, sometimes almost impossible podcasts out in India. And last week, we spoke to Nikesh Murali from Indian Noir, who does amazing audio noir, crime, fantasy, fiction content. He's been doing it for 3 years. Go check that episode out if you haven't so far. On today's episode, I'm talking to someone who's equally interesting in his background and in his effort to make podcasts. I'm glad to be joined on this episode by Keshav Chaturvedi, who is a photographer turned travel podcaster. Keshav, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here.
I'm so glad to have you here because, like I was saying before we started talking, photography or travel photography, to me in my head, taking what you've seen there और उसको शब्दों में फिर travel podcast में turn करना, ये जो creative challenge है, इसके बारे में मुझे आपसे काफी सारी बात करनी है. But, and this is where my producer Vishal will say thank you to me later, we will go into a short break before we start this conversation with Keshav. Back on Storytellers and Storysellers with Keshav Chaturvedi from Tedhe Medhe Raaste right after these messages.
$100. That's all it takes to begin your journey with Bitcoin and Ethereum. No, really. With CoinSwitch, you can start investing in over 100 cryptocurrencies with just 100 rupees. On top of that, there are zero charges for deposits and withdrawals, so you can trade, buy, sell, however and whenever you want. All of this, plus their extremely intuitive interface, makes CoinSwitch the perfect app for beginners in the crypto space. But don't take my word for it. Just download CoinSwitch for free and try it out for yourself. If you'd like more information on cryptocurrencies, tune into a show about crypto with me, Rohan Joshi, my new adventure on IVM Podcasts. CoinSwitch, kuch to badlega.
And we're back. We're talking to Keshav Chaturvedi from Tedhe Medhe Raaste. It's a travel podcast. Keshav, sir, I want to get started by asking you, ये कहाँ से आया idea?
होता क्या है कि I used to write and but my first inclination was to click. I think visually. And that is the reason I became a photographer.
Right.
I just wanted to... So whenever I would click the photograph, I would realize that, yes, picture may say 1,000 words. So let me then create a story in words, which I have at least 1,000 words at my disposal to create a one postcard or a one photograph and a story within that one frame. So it's kind of a reverse engineering that I was working on, and that you are using those 1,000 words or 500 words to narrate the story of that one frame. Started doing it, and then one day I realized, okay, you can do it. Like I went to see many vlogs on YouTube, and travel vlogs. And I would always feel that there will be a great challenge. How will I narrate a story in words? And then I said, okay, these are the people who are using all the visual mediums and showing you about hundreds of things within a short span of 5 minutes. So one thing I decided that I'll be very specific about an incident, about one place within a city or one incident. And then I realized that the way to narrate that story would be to weave in some local story, some local flavor into it. And then let's see if this one frame can be told in a story format. So the point was that I am trying to explain you about a photograph that I have shown you, that one frame, and whatever is available in that, whatever backstory that is a part of that frame, I wanted to just narrate.
Wonderful. I mean, I loved the way you started that by saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and here I was with 1,000 words already down. And that's such a nice way of looking at what you're doing. And while you were talking, it felt like if I look at your picture and your podcast together, the picture might be 2D, but the podcast adds depth to it with your words and with your experiences, right? Let me ask you about this, sir. How did you start with photography? Like, because I want to use our time together to talk to you about, and for our listeners' benefit, to talk to you about the art of photography and how you got good at it and what went into that. And then the art of podcasting. Now you're 30 episodes in. What have you learned? So we'll take it as a sort of the two halves, talking about photography and podcasting. Let's get started with photography. Where did that start? And how did you take your first steps in it? And now with so much accomplished history behind you, what role has photography played in your life? That
Look, like everyone, every young man or a woman, I used to travel in, say, early 90s. And I had a hotshot camera.
Right.
So if you remember that, so it had a very thin film in it. I would click photographs, and whenever I would come back, I would be really dejected that whatever I have seen, it is never produced in that photograph.
Right.
So somebody told me that you get into training with a professional photographer, take a professional camera, then you may be able to produce something that you have seen. Like a sunset at Trivandrum Beach, Kovalam Beach, you will be able to take a photograph that you can remember, and it will evoke the same emotions that you felt when you were there. To revisit that moment, I started learning photography.
Right.
And because the normal hotshot cameras were not giving me those photographs that I wanted, the richness in color, the texture, the play of light and darkness. That was the reason I started learning photography, that whenever my memories start to fade, I can just look at them and I can revisit that place with the same kind of emotions. And that I can only have if I am not a monochromatic person. I need to have all kinds of colors in it.
Right.
Monochrome can be a kind of visual relief for me for some time, but I'm a colors person. I am really attracted by dark colors or very bright colors, both of them. So that was the driving force to learn photography. And then one thing led to the other. Once you got into digital photography, then it became very easy. You could go on clicking hundreds of photographs and then have the best one. The challenge was when you had a reel with 36 frames.
Right.
You were very miser with your clicking because you could only carry 4 or 5 rolls with you.
Right.
So that has been a liberating feeling. Again, coming back to your question, the first and the biggest motive or motivation to learn photography was to have those bright photographs to relive the memories.
I love it. I love the way you put that. And it put my second question, which was, what role has photography played in your life? It answered that question so wonderfully, right? It was for you to add detail and color to your memories so that they never fade. Let me ask you this, sir. You talked about a very inward-looking motivation to start photography, right? But then you went professional as well. And if I'm not mistaken, you primarily do nature and outdoor photography. Is that that's
yes,
right?
Yeah.
Looking back now over your career of rich and vivid images, what advice would you give to yourself when you were turning pro as a photographer?
Okay. I should have been more open to different kind of experiences. Very early, I decided that I will be a travel photographer.
Right.
I think that someone who is starting to delve into photography today, had I been doing it today, I should have seen some of product photography, fashion photography, because all these things, they teach you the minor nuances of light,
right,
which you can replicate in your travel photography also. So in a way, I am like a tree in a jungle. It just grew wherever it got light.
Right.
So it's not a straight, it's a manicured, it's not a manicured tree. It's just a tree. You can say that it has a lot of character, maybe, But I feel that had it been slightly more organized, I would have been able to utilize my time better, my talent better, and I would have been able to contribute to photography more. So my advice to myself would be that I should have stuck to a professional as an apprentice for a longer time.
Wonderful.
And had diversified my interests in other sorts of photography, and then brought all the things together.
Lovely. I want to ask you a little bit more about your photography, and I just love the reflective way you put it there. Such formative advice, especially because we get obsessed with what we like. We get obsessed with what we're into, right? It could be, I only do concert photography, or only do nature, or travel, or whatever. But so important to know that the nuances that come out of doing different things within the specialization that you're in gives you that exposure, gives you that different perspective, looking at it differently. That's very, very important. Tell me about some of the experiences that photography has brought you, some of the places you've been to that you'd never go if you weren't a photographer, or things that would never happen to you if you were a photographer. If there's a couple of anecdotes you could share.
2 or 3 things. One, I was in a very remote village in Andhra Pradesh, and I was clicking photographs, and then there was this old woman who I wanted to click, and I just, with my signs, I asked her, I sought her permission whether I can click her or not. And she said, she just suggested with a hand gesture, wait a minute. And then she went in, got dressed, came back, and I clicked her. And using someone as an interpreter, she said that, send me a photograph.
Right.
And I'm talking to you about 20 years ago.
Right.
Back of her mind, she must have known that I will never come back.
Right.
I also knew that I am not going to come back. But the pains she took, that I get a good frame. And she went and got ready for a complete stranger. The joy of being clicked was more than enough for her.
Lovely.
And that is what remains with me even today. And I have forgotten what village it was. It's right. That because I was traveling along. It was somewhere near this place in Khammam district, and I have forgotten the village, but I still remember that woman. And I have the photograph in transparency. I don't know whether I'll be able to go to her, whether she's alive or not, because she was an old woman.
Right.
Then again, there was this man in Mahoba district in UP.
Right.
It's a back of beyond. Even today, it's not a very well-developed area. He was a transporter. And so I was told that there is a transporter, you can go and meet him and you'll like to click him. And if somebody tells you that he's a transporter, the image that you have of a very pot-bellied man with no character on his face and a businessman.
Right.
How a businessman can be a good-looking man. But I reached and the man was standing on his door. It was evening. Evening light was falling on him. Winters. So the evening light is now red.
Right.
The man had a broad forehead, white hair, white beard, and he looked like a man straight out of Rajasthan Royal.
Right, absolutely.
I clicked him. He was very pensive, and I just clicked him. And in that moment, the penny dropped. That, look, your preconceived notions are of no use. Profession does not define a person.
Right, absolutely.
Neither his physicality nor his
personality.
Whatever there is in his heart. If he is a bit reflective, then profession will not dictate his personality. Personality is something that comes from within.
Right.
That woman taught me to be in that moment and the joy of doing something, not getting any result out of it.
Right.
She knew that I will not come back. But that whole moment. So she taught me how to live the moment. And this man taught me never to judge a book by its cover and never hold preconceived notions, because they restrict you as a professional, whether you are a writer or you are a photographer, and especially if you are a creative person. You shouldn't have any preconceived notions.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Very consistent with what you said earlier as well about having openness and being open to other thoughts and other ideas. I love it. I think it comes with the territory, right? When you're beholding so many different things, beauty can come from so many different places. Character, like you said, can come from so many different things. And a photographer's keen eye should be open to recognize all of that and capture it as well. I absolutely love it. Let me ask you this last bit about photography, and then we'll hop on over and talk about the podcast. Times have changed. I think, let me ask you this in a different way, right? And when I started this podcast, I've done performances before and stuff like that, but I was very acutely aware of the fact that this is getting recorded forever, right? Similarly, when pictures would be clicked in previous times, there would be a moment captured in time, right? And people prepared for it differently. They presented themselves differently. But as more and more cameras have become available, with digital cameras, with all of us having one, two, multiple phones with multiple cameras in there, how do you feel the photograph itself has changed as we have gone from analog to digital? Has it become, because there is so much of it, has it become more important, less important? Has it become ubiquitous? Has it lost its sheen? Or is it a good problem to have, a good problem of plenty? How do you look at that?
A bit of all.
Right.
Okay. Say 25 years down the line, when there were few people with a camera and it would be clicked on a roll, there was this excitement that I am in a godforsaken place, I'm clicking photographs. Then I'll go back to Delhi. Mm-hmm. I'll give those rolls to be developed. It will take a day or two to come.
Right.
So the process of clicking and then seeing the final product was a process of 7 to 8 days or 9 days or 10 days.
Right.
There was this lot of excitement. And when you were traveling around with the camera hanging in your neck, mm-hmm. you were an unknown commodity. Right. You were one of those rare commodities, like a rare bird sighting. You were like that. So people would look at you very differently. And I still remember, even in cities, the kids would follow you and they would ask, "Ek meri photo bhi kheech dijiyega." And you would click. At times, you took that as a cost of being a photographer.
Right.
Okay. There was this sense of innocence in people who were being clicked. Mm-hmm. If you would click, I have seen women of all the ages blush if I would click them.
Right.
At that time.
Right.
Children would smile. Teenagers would be coy. And there were some young boys, they would just start giggling. Men, elderly, they would be pensive. Mm-hmm. So there was all range of emotions. Today what has happened is, everyone can click a photograph of their own.
Right.
They are into selfie mode.
Right.
What that has done is, this fear of camera is gone.
Right.
They can click a photograph, they can look at themselves. In that moment, they know, oh, acha nahi aaya. They'll delete it, they'll click one more. So yes, it has made them very camera savvy. Mm-hmm. They have become photograph savvy. But all those range of emotions have gone. Now it's just 2 or 3 emotions you'll see in every photograph.
Right.
Either they are smiling or there is a pout. And there's nothing.
Right.
So that is something which I don't like. That innocence is gone because everyone is so familiar. It's like a camera has, there's the saying, familiarity breeds contempt.
Right.
So there's a contempt for your own photograph being clicked. At that time, it was an event to get clicked.
Absolutely.
Today, it's not an event. So that is part 1. Part 2, I have seen that whenever you went before smartphone days, you would go and you would enjoy the place, click a photograph, and then ask someone to click me with something in the background. Like Taj Mahal in the background. But today, people are just going everywhere and they are not interested in looking at a place. They are interested in looking at themselves, and everything has receded into the background.
Right.
Every photograph you see on the Facebook or on Instagram, I am in the foreground.
Right.
And everything else is incidental.
Right.
So this is something I, as a person who is on the other side of 50, would not condone it. But then that's their life. But good thing is that this proliferation of camera has also led to an explosion of talent.
Right.
Talent from those quarters, talent from an age group where you could never have felt that these are the people who can click so beautifully. It was a very exclusivist game. Photography was an exclusivist game.
Right.
And they would decide what is good and what is bad. But then today, kid from anywhere and everywhere, you see Instagram, it's filled with such great photographs and such great compositions that even after putting in 20-25 years, you feel, wow, man, how has he done it? So there is so much to learn now. So much of quality that is available to today's person, which wasn't available at that time.
Right.
So that is a plus.
I absolutely loved it. I mean, it reminded me of reading Susan Sontag on photography and how she talked about the image being merchandised, but then you talked about how it's become more inclusive as well. That's absolutely correct. What I'm going to do is go into a quick break right now. On the other side of this break, we will talk about Tedhe Medhe Raaste and the shift from photography to podcasting. Join us back on Storytellers and Storysellers. We're talking to Keshav Chaturvedi right after these messages.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On The Longest Constitution with Priya, find out what's obscene about obscenity and why artists and writers have been penalized for it. On Cyrus Says, Rochelle Rao joins Cyrus to talk about her amazing career in IPL and her comeback on The Kapil Sharma Show. Srinath Rangamani, design head at Swiggy, joins Kedar and Vineet on Audio Gyan to take them through his design perspectives. Get all the updates regarding current immigration trends on Know Your Kanun when Amber is joined by Shoshana T. Green and Alexandra Cole, experts from Green and Spiegel. And on The Fighting Goat, Arjun and Somesh talk about the epic MMA fights of the decade, controversies, and the end of Pride FC. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week on the network, Cred Cred, Bank of Baroda, Quarter, CoinSwitch, Kuber, and Intuit India. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Back on Storytellers and Storysellers, we're talking to Keshav Chaturvedi. If you haven't heard the conversation so far, which would be weird for you to start the podcast in the middle here somewhere, but Keshav and I were talking about photography, and it's always great to get perspective from someone who's seen and done it in how it was in the analog days and the digital days, right? I think that cusp allows you a prism that cuts through, right? It gives you a cross section. And Keshav had some wonderful, very, very insightful things to say. I'm going to press on for more insightful things from Keshav about podcasting. ये बताइए sir, ये कैसे किया आपने? मतलब, you talked about it very briefly in the beginning when you said a picture is worth 1,000 words, and then you start painting a picture with the podcast. How did that actually take shape? What did you have to, if you can break it down for us and tell us how you took what was in your head or what you saw as a picture, right? What was the process like to convert that into a podcast?
Podcast to me was the platform where all my talents dovetailed into one. I'll narrate a bit about my background. I started off as a Hindi journalist. Then I went into English journalism, print. Then I went into television. From television, I went into online. And meanwhile, I was also learning photography and doing professional photography and everything. So as a journalist, I was asked to write. I used to write. I learned how to write in that moment. In television, I was called upon to do voiceovers, presentations, and all that. Mm-hmm. And I would keep thinking that I am interested in travel. I like to photograph. I have an ability to speak. I can write too, in Hindi or in English, both. These are all separate ideas, separate skills. What will that platform be where all of them can come together? And lo and behold, 20 years down the line, IVM podcast comes and everything just fell into place. Perfect. So you keep your photographs or you remember the photograph that you had. Some of the bromides I still have. So you look at them. Then I start writing my script. And I have this thing that 500 words or 400 words is the maximum in which I have to just narrate the story.
Right.
So the first thing that I put as a condition is 400 to 450 words. That's it. And then the second thing that kicks in is, okay, had I been a photographer who decides when to click, because he or she instinctively knows that this particular movement will become a frozen moment in time.
Absolutely.
So you are just taking that leaf out of it. So I brought that kind of discipline to writing also. And then I knew instinctively that I will not have visual in my arsenal. It's just voice.
Right.
So I have to paint a picture with words and voice. So I had to keep a check on my tonality, the way I have to deliver the. But how will I deliver it? Then I had to invest a bit of emotion in it. And what I have realized is that people do not want cold, hard facts. What they want is legends. They want your personal incidents.
Absolutely.
Or some story that is very specific to that land. They may not have heard about it, or an incident. You just narrate it as it was. So here, when people write in films, in this screenplay, so screenplay writing came to help me. So that is how I started off. And then I realized, okay, it's a challenge. Let me take it. And I'm happy that people are liking it.
I mean, it's hard to not be fascinated by the stuff that you're putting out. I mean, and I love the way you package it as well, right? For example, your episode on Shimla is called Pahadon Ki Rani and Kanyakumari is called Bharat Ka Antim Shore. You really take what is conventionally understood or learned and put it in a word, in a story that feels so natural, just exactly like a travelogue for your ears. I think it comes out really well. It's also interesting, sir, that you say this. But when I was speaking to Nikesh from Indian Noir on the first episode of Podcast Month, he also said something very similar, right? He started out as a writer, was blessed with a wonderful voice. And then he trained other faculties and other skills. And then podcasting was where it all really came together for him, which is such a great testimonial for this medium. I mean, it is about audio only, right? And a lot of people that I meet, and I do this for my day job as well, I market podcasts, they tell me, oh, maybe it's not for me, I need something more to get engaged, etc. So I'm like, up, try to karke dekho, right? Get into it, give it an hour. And there are hundreds of really great podcasts to choose from, but give it an hour to test out the power of this medium, right? And I think with artists like you, and I don't think there's another word for it, but with artists like you who are multidisciplinary, who are good at 3, 4, 5 things, finding their space in podcasts, I feel like it's a very bright time to be a podcaster, right? Would you agree?
Absolutely. And the listeners should also realize one thing. Professionals should also realize one thing, as well as the marketers. They should all realize this thing. Radio came before television.
Right.
Radio has a huge recall because it's a very easy medium.
Right.
It doesn't warrant your visual attention.
Right.
So you can be driving a car, you can be sitting in a metro, you can be flying in a plane, and yet you can keep listening to it. One. For professionals, it is equally a great medium. Why? Because, at times, if I put certain conditions on you, the best will come out of it.
Right.
When like a blind man has very acute listening abilities.
Right.
God compensates you some way. So podcast, when there is no visual, then your creative juices start flowing. You start working on your voice. You start making your script that much tighter. You are that much more engaged in writing,
right,
and speaking. And it becomes a two-way process. So when that quality is produced and the listener listens, it will stay there for a longer period of time.
Absolutely.
And I think therein lies the power of podcast. Podcast will be an anchor. It's kind of a sleeper hit.
Right.
It will just get under your skin,
right,
and it will stay there for. Visual mediums will have their seasons.
Right.
Audio will be there forever. That kind of thing.
Beautiful.
That's a love affair you'll remember always, all your life. Because visually, something more captivating will come, and you can move on to it.
Right.
Voice is something where you don't know about the face of the person. It's just the words, and words will stay in your mind forever. So I think it's a very powerful medium, and it's a great medium.
I love what you said there. I think that's going to be my quote from this episode, where you said video will have its seasons, but audio will be there forever. Keshav, I want to get into your process a little bit more. Can you tell us how long it takes you to write an episode? You said 450 words, but are you like an obsessive rewriter? How do you put it together?
Maximum time goes in thinking through the initial line.
Right.
Then it takes 1.5 hours to write the first draft. Then I leave it for an hour. I come back to it again. I give it a read. And it may be that I may take a day, I may sleep over it to round it off. Because conclusion to me in podcast, conclusion is equally important as the opening. Because conclusion should be like a great climax.
Right.
And with an emotional hook. So at times the climax where I take a longer time. So all in all, if you take the entire process from beginning to end, you can say that I take 3.5 hours.
Wonderful.
To prepare one script. Yeah.
Wonderful. Let me follow that up and ask you, I mean, since you spend so much time writing, creating in other media as well, what are some of the rules of podcasting that have emerged to you? What are, say, principles that you have either seen other podcasters follow and want to emulate, or have discovered for yourself over the course of your 30 or so episodes?
See, I am into narration podcast. I am not doing interview podcasts.
Right.
But I think interviewers will be in a better position to say. But after giving 1 or 2 interviews, I think that the choice of the guest, I think, takes care of 99% of your woe. The second part would be preparing the questions.
Right.
The more the probing questions they are, or more open-ended questions they are, the more person will feel relaxed and enthused and will be confident to open up. So that is about question and hour kind of podcast. But when it comes to self-narrating story, then you need to have a script ready first. That is part one.
Right.
And you are not reading it. It's like you have to fall in love with the mic. You have to feel that mic is a human being.
Right.
And you are narrating the story to the mic.
Right.
The moment you fall in love with that mic, I think then you can safely say that you are a professional. Because you must always know that it's your voice that is being heard. And the voice will have maximum power if it is backed by a great script and right kind of modulation.
Right.
Emotions are very important. Those who discount emotions, they will realize to their own, at their own peril, that you may be great, you may have all the right phrases packed and all the right ideas and everything, but it will not cut much ice with people. People are not rational. People are emotional. They need stories.
Absolutely.
They need stories. They need emotions.
Absolutely.
And if you can tug their emotional strings, you are through.
Wonderful. I think that should just be part of podcasting 101 for anybody who's listening. I just love the way you structured that and ended it with the most important thing, which is you're telling a story. You're not recounting facts. You're sharing your experience, right? You're not writing a journal saying, okay, this is what I did on this day at 10:55 a.m. I went and had coffee somewhere, right? You have to bring out the emotion and how you felt on that day. It totally is perfect for you, isn't it? For someone who started out saying, I want to preserve my memories and I want to add depth and color to them, to be able to then take those pictures and relayer it with emotion, maybe 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years later, with all the wisdom that you have now and with all the excitement that you felt back then. I mean, it's just wonderful to have you on board as a fellow podcaster and such a testament to the power of this medium. Keshav sir, as we bring the episode to a close, I do a small segment called Water with Vineet. I don't drink, and this has nothing to do with any other talk show that has a similar name. Nope, nothing, not at all. I'm going to ask you questions. You'll have to give me, snap answers. You know how it works. Let me start by asking you, what was the first picture that you clicked that made you go, wow, I think I can do this professionally?
Sunset at Kovalam Beach.
Sunset at Kovalam Beach. What was the first time you thought of podcasting and said, okay, this is what I'm going to try next? Was it when IVM came to you, or was there a time before that as well?
Last year, I heard about IVM, and I think that was the time I heard few of their podcasts, the postcards from nowhere also. And then I decided, yes, I can do it, and I will do it in my own language, that is Hindi, because there I am most expressive. So that is how.
Wonderful. Shout out to my brother Utsav Mamoria from Postcards from Nowhere. Please check out his podcast if you like travel podcasts as well. My last question to you, sir, is where next from putting this podcast out? It's doing pretty well. I love the artwork. I absolutely love the artwork that you're putting out. And I love the very different way that you've chosen to promote it as well. I mean, there are very few podcasts which have nice thought through promotion that's happening on social, which is super important as well. But where to from here?
I would like to start a podcast on history. History is a very disruptive and a very dangerous minefield these days.
For sure.
Because everyone is ideologically, they have taken a very hard position. Most of the historians are accusing each other of peddling one
Fake
kind of
news
story
or lies,
one story or the other. In reality, there are two things. History is always written by the victors. History is always divided between us and them. Us are always right and them are always wrong.
Absolutely.
Now, once you take these two biases out, I would like to start a podcast in which I would tell the people that, see, there is no left or right. History in its own way. It's like a river, it's flowing. Initially, it had a very violent past. Then it meandered around. And now we are at the delta, where history is merging with the larger ocean. You have to see history as just a flow of a river. Mm-hmm. And you have to accept it in toto. The ugly side of history, the good side of history, the beautiful side of it. It's a package. You can't pick and choose. Take it as a whole. So I would like to present that holistic story. Not today, maybe sometime in future.
Count me in for whenever you do that. I'm a big history buff. And I love the way you put it, right? It's not an us and them. It's absolutely not us, because you're here today. That was someone else 10 years, 20 years, 50 years ago. You choose to identify as us with them. They don't care about you, first of all. But yeah, I mean, I'm a big history buff. Love history podcasts. Absolutely love them. On that note, I want to ask you, what are some of your favorite podcasts? You can give us 3.
One was Podcast from Nowhere. The second one is by Cyrus Brocha.
Right.
I listened to what he has to say. And
Cyrus says.
Cyrus says, yeah. And then Tapri Tales. The girl's perspective about... and when I came to know what she intended, that Addabazi in Calcutta, it's a male preserve.
Right.
So, and thinking that 4 girls are sitting exactly in that situation and how will they talk, I found that, yes, it's quite a unique way to present her case.
Absolutely love it. And they're all IVM podcasts, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So big shout out to Amit Doshi and Kavita on doing well for IVM and putting out great shows like the 3 that Sir just talked about, and this show, and Tedhe Medhe Raaste with Keshav Chaturvedi. Keshav sir, thank you so much for spending time with us on this evening. I loved having you on the show. Thank you for all the wisdom and perspective about podcasting and photography. I hope you had fun.
Thank you, Vineet, and I had great fun, and it was a pleasure being with you for last 40-45 minutes. I don't know how much it is, but it just went in a breeze. So thank you so much.
Love it. Thank you for being on this. That's it from me, Vineet Kanabar, on another episode of Storytellers and Storysellers. I am contractually obligated to ask you to tell me how you thought this episode was. Write to me at AshcharyaFuckit on Twitter, or at AshcharyaFuckit on Instagram, or at IVM Podcast, or wherever else. That's it. This is me, Vineet Kanabar, saying goodbye.
Season 3 of Echoes of India, your favorite history podcast, is back on the IVM Podcast Network. I'm your host, Anirudh Kanasetti. Join me on a journey through the wonders of early India as we explore the centuries between Buddha and Ashoka with critical research, empathy, and great storytelling. Along the way, you'll hear from all the vibrant peoples who shaped our world, from monks and farmers to warriors and emperors. New episodes are out every Monday.
If you're a cricket fan, check out Edges and Sledges, India's favorite cricket podcast.
The podcast focuses on Indian cricket, the IPL, and has a ton of banter both on and off the field.
We talk about the week's biggest cricket stories with current and ex-international cricketers, coaches, or sometimes just between us.
And it's hosted by me, DJ.
Me, Varun.
And me, Ashwin.
New episodes release every week.
You can catch us on the IVM Podcast's website, app,
or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Check out the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast.